Because hybrid, if you call it hybrid, then basically you don't need to do anything about it. You can just talk about it in the conference, and it solves the problem. If you call it terrorism, then it implies reaction. That then there's actually something needs to happen. In several countries, there have been incidents that we know that have been organized, financed by Russians in order to burn down the buildings, harm people, destroy property. So how else can you call it? And this is where the biggest danger comes from. That if we stay in this situation long enough, that sends a very clear message to Russia that basically they are able to do whatever they want. They can walk around, they can harm people, they can burn down buildings, and we still will be talking about the hybrid. And this is the biggest problem. And I usually say that I'm not afraid of Russia. I'm afraid of our fear of Russia. This is what really keeps me up at night. And if we don't find a way how to stop Russians, how to send a message to them that this is it, this is a red line, you cannot cross it, then they will continue.
Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives podcast. I'm Heidi Kuda, and today High Fidelity and I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing the former foreign minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis. He's also a former member of the EU Parliament. We're going to be talking today about what EU countries, what Europe needs to do to beat back Russian aggression, and why his mantra is never surrender. Have a listen. Mr. Landsbergis, thank you so very much for being with High Fidelity and I today. Your voice has been so incredibly important in this fight that we've been in. And that clip we just saw about if we called it terrorism, for me, shows your profound understanding of the weak words the West has been using. And those weak words have led to inaction, and I believe the loss of my country, the United States of America. Can you just sort of tell our viewers who are global why you came to that conclusion and what we should be, positioning ourselves now in terms of narrative warfare, how we need to be thinking about this?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you on your show. So for us in Lithuania, what was called the hybrid warfare against my country, against the region in Europe, probably signified one of the best examples of what has been happening, since the full-scale invasion into Ukraine. That the West has chosen to be extremely careful not to overstep the red lines in our own minds, because if we do that, we might anger Putin, and as if there would be no way how to get us out of that anger. And it led to the situation where Putin was able to escalate freely in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, push those red lines further down, onto us. And unfortunately, we presented ourselves as helpless in most of the cases. We were unable to show to Putin, that we are ready to stand up, that we have means in our arsenal to push back and to inflict, pain when it is needed. And the example that you showed, that was the things that were happening just, a couple of kilometers from my house now. The shopping mall that was burned down, and it has now been proven that it was Russians. And we still don't call it anything else. I mean, it's a hybrid. So the reaction to it is also hybrid.
It's just profoundly incredible to me, having, living in a country that's been a target nation of information warfare for more than a decade. So many of the same players involved, the Paul Manaforts of the world involved in Ukraine, involved in Trump's election. And I think because of these weak words and not calling it terrorism, I don't see how you cannot call it terrorism when there's been poisonings, defenestrations, cables cut, planes shot out of the sky. And what we see in this sort of KGB mindset is that they're very good at all these manipulations and all these tricks. But why do you think the West has been so feckless in its response? Clearly, what Putin responds to is like what you're seeing Poland do, crash rearmament. They'll look elsewhere if they see shows of strengths. What happened in the West to make them so weak in response? It's been devastating to those of us who understand, this type of war.
Well, I've did some reading lately into what was called the Truman Doctrine. Back in the time when we were able to say, to separate the good from bad, the we were able to say, what's evil and what's not, and it was very clear that that there are free peoples around the world, and there are dictators, totalitarian dictators, and these dictators, if they're forced upon the people, they break the rules-based order of the world, and it goes against the U.S. interests. And that has been a doctrine for decades. And somewhere down the road, we started losing it. We were unable to really distinguish, what isn't U.S. interests in the world, and per extension also the Western, because European countries in most cases, would follow doctrinal logic of certain certain, at least in certain elements from the U.S. So what we have been seeing is that probably freedom has lost its value. That this, and in sense, the reason why we should be defending it. Stability probably has replaced it for at least the previous administration. That means that we are more keen in retaining the status quo rather than saying, okay, we will help those who fight for freedom, in their fight. And the new administration in US, in my view, is actually just a continuation. They get rid of it completely. They are now not afraid to say that, free people do not have a place in their mind. Actually, this is the free people that hinder their agenda. That is kind of that they are the trouble, not the dictators anymore. So we've been in a slow, change since 1950s up until now, where probably now we have to declare that the new doctrine, the Trump doctrine, is being, implemented.
It's absolutely devastating to hear it so clearly from you, but 100% accurate. High fidelity.
So we talk about hybrid warfare. We talk about cognitive warfare. We talk about information warfare. And everybody is focusing on the first part of that and not the second part. Is it's warfare. Russia is engaged in war against the West, burning down shopping malls, attempting to assassinate the CEO of Rheinmetall, the Skripal poisoning, Yanukovych uh, in Ukraine. I just, it's war, and it's the same playbook, and I see it everywhere across Europe. What is keeping Europe from acknowledging this is war? It's not hybrid, it's not cognitive, it's not information, it's not whatever. It's war. And Russia is engaged in acts of war. What needs to be done to get?
Well, I hope that I'm not right, but I mean, in kind of what the situation currently reminds me of is that Europe is playing this animal, that when attacked by an aggressor or a bigger animal, that it just plays dead, in hopes that that the predator will just walk away. So if we don't admit that we're under attack, we're just lie on our backs, belly up, not looking pretty. That is our hope, that that Putin just sniffs us and just decides, okay, they're not worth eating because basically they're just dead, and walk the other way. Because for me, I really, really don't understand the whole debate that has been going, and especially now. Because if we divide it, okay, so since the war started up until the Trump's election, you might have thought, and we have that discussion in Lithuania as well, that look, I mean, it's extremely costly to have, you know, a European defense strategy, really, to change, you know, to imagine the world without the US. I mean, we're talking trillions, literally, like people calculated, it's like, I don't know, 5 trillion euros that need to be invested in order for us to be able to replace the United States here in Europe. So since there was no debate about that, or at least, you know, we could have pretended that there's no debate about that, it was kind of, at least you could have find an explanation why we're there. So we invested, Poles invested more, but the Europe was not moving. So Putin did not wake us up. So now comes Trump, and he says, "Look, I might be moving out of Europe, and I'm convinced that this will happen in some way or form." And now you have leaders of Europe literally declaring that, look, Europe is a, you know, soft power project. We need to think more about our culture and songs and I don't know what, rather than weapons. And to me, there's literally just no explanation other than you guys back at the front, you know, you deal with Putin, and you know we'll just be fine wherever we are further down south or west. And this is scary because basically it means that the Europe, you know, what we consider it being, you know, some sort of a union that takes care of all the, you know, all the countries within, that it might be no more. And yeah, so that is the best explanation that I have come up with.
Oh my God, thank you so much for that question and that response. That whole playing dead analogy is just so perfect. I've had conversations recently with friends in Europe that if EU countries do not get together and form strategy or have a treaty about techno-fascism and come up with some sort of strategy against it, it's just going to be like the domino effect, like what we saw in America. And my fear is there will be countries where they're going to be worried about the next election. And what we failed to do in America was have a leader, and he had 4 years to do it. High Fidelity, Jim and I actually were asked to write a sample speech for Joe Biden to give about the type of warfare we're talking about, this invisible war. And it made its way up the food chain. And ultimately, the response was, do you really have to mention Russia? Well, yeah, you have to mention Russia because Russia is the aggressor. So, the question I have for you, I believe that we have failed to identify the proper public enemy. We talk about Putin, Musk, Trump. I feel the enemy, and I've been doing a lot of thinking on this, are the political technologists whose job it is to hack the minds of people in the West and make them be their own foot soldiers against their own countries and against democracy. And can you please help people understand who and what political technologists are, what they do, and why we've just allowed our freedoms to be corrupted and exploited by countries that have no freedom?
Well, look, I'm, you know, as a you know person who ran a party for 10 years, you know, I've never shied away from responsibility. And I know what responsibility as a politician is. You know, you're there at the front, you're receiving all sorts of advice from all sorts of people, but it's up to you to make the decision. And you know, for example, you know, when it comes to for example to Brexit, right? There, it is known fact that there were quite a lot of people with their own hidden or not so hidden agendas that advised the leaders of the country to do what proved to be, and what many people believed it will be, you know, a disastrous decision for United Kingdom. And but then again, would I think that those, you know, people advising were to blame, or the politicians? I would say that the politicians had the choice, and history will remember them. They will be in the books. They will be called out, and remember it as somebody who did this terrible thing. So it's kind of, I like to keep the focus on those people, the same way the focus was on me, and I thought that it was a right thing. And if politicians do the right thing, if they make the right choices, I mean, they're able to push back. If that answers your question.
It does. I just feel like in America, people have no idea. All Trump had to do was say Russia, Russia, Russia. It's all a hoax. And there was a 30% of the population
Mm,
that said, yeah, that's right. Turned out we only needed that 30% of the population to actually put him back into office. But what they don't see is that there are buildings throughout the world filled with PhD level people whose jobs it is to pour gasoline on our
mm.
own internal fires and light
Oh yeah.
matches. And so those what I've learned are called political
Mm.
technologists are these invisible enemy that people don't see. And how do
Yeah.
we kind of get them to respond to it? Because Europe needs to be aware of it as well. But I appreciate what you said about the buck stopping with leaders. It was the abdication of leadership in America that put us here.
No, I mean, I would expand that on this. We are, look, in Lithuania, we've faced Russia's, activities for a long time. I don't think that they've ever kind of retreated in some shape or form. We had our, sort of normal years when Yeltsin was in power, but, as long as, and as soon as Putin came along, we've always faced Russians in one way or form. But with time, we believed, and I believe, that we've built up resilience towards Russian, propaganda and stuff like that. So kind of we have these even NGOs in Lithuania that kind of check the media. They call out when there's something, basically when there's a reprint from Russian media or something like that. They publish it. They independent, so kind of they're trusted and so on and so forth. But I think what we're facing currently is a new phenomenon, and honestly, it's you know it better how it's played out in the United States. But for example, in Europe, now it is very clearly seen. For example, in Romania, where suddenly out of nowhere, a candidate appears with a extreme agenda, anti-Ukrainian, anti-European, basically pro-Russian, and suddenly he's just on TikTok. He's just on TikTok, basically talking whatever comes to his mind. So that probably, reminds you of somebody else. But and it feels as if, and suddenly, election comes and he's number one. And it feels like there are just no instruments. Most of other politicians are not on TikTok, or it's how do you fight? It's not a public space that we were prepared for. There's no place for arguments. There's nothing like that. And then it has millions of shares and it millions of followers, and it's just spread all over. And then you lose a battle. So this is a very very new phenomenon, and I'm particularly worried about the role of TikTok that is playing in this. And I think that we have to start building up new instruments, and maybe Romania in some way is actually paving the way. They're being very, hardline about this, but from where I stand, that basically they're doing everything that they can to defend their country.
Brilliant. I have one more question in the time we have left, but high fidelity, you go.
Okay, so we're discussing Romania. We're discussing Georgescu, and he also has an associate who runs a private military company named Potra, and they've been doing basically Tutushki type activities
Yeah.
on the streets of Romania. What we do know about Georgescu is his political party claimed zero in expenditures, except it turns out that there were millions of dollars spent on him on TikTok and advertising and promotion.
Hmm.
So the reason he got kicked off, where did that money come from? It looks like Russia. But here's the playbook. And I look around and I look at Moldova and I see that Elon Shore fella
Hmm.
who had to flee,
Yeah.
right? I look at in Lithuania, you've got Aleksin, Zaitsev, Zemilis, you've got the Abramovich children, you have the billionaires, you have the rich. In Georgia, we have Ivanishvili. In let's see, Slovakia, you've got Shrenko and Babis is crossing over to Chechnya. In America, you have Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen. You have all these billionaires who are funding this activity against democracy Do people in Europe see that, or do they still not acknowledge that Russian money and rich businessmen are attempting to overthrow governments? Do they not see that? Yes or no?
I think that we're still in denial. Clearly, this is still the denial phase of the reality. I've just came back from Georgia basically a couple of days ago. I've met I met the opposition there, the non-governmental organizations, parents of the people who are political prisoners being held in prisons right now. I mean, it's just so obvious, that we are losing the country. The people themselves there are losing their country to Russia, where without tanks, just via, as you said, with the political technology and then capturing the state, capturing the institutions, changing the laws so that make the country unrecognizable, then one day you wake up in the morning and you understand that it's no longer the country that you've been, born into, or you remember, throughout your life, because it's barely resembles a democratic country. We have political prisoners all over the place, and it will soon resemble more Belarus rather than a democratic country. So it's truly horrible, and to think of it that now they're left alone. Wherever I've met the people, whoever I talked to, all of them had one request. Can you get Europe's attention? Can you help us get Europe's attention? Because nobody's here. We're literally fighting this alone. And on one hand, it's heartbreaking, really, to understand that they're freedom-loving people, and the only thing that they want is actually to remain free. And I would definitely not like to kind of to understand that there is nobody else to help them. So in a way, people like me, or what we can do is actually to ring the bells as long as possible for certain leaders to wake up.
Thank you so much for that. And also, truly thank you for the work that you do and the bravery that you possess, because you have been a one-man wrecking ball against this type of warfare and exposing it. And if we called it terrorism, to me, is still the best question to pose to Western leaders. My last question for you really goes back to the work that you are doing to push the EU, to push European nations to actually deal with this and not play possum. And I've been reading Václav Havel's book, The Dissident Essays, The Power of the Powerless, and learning so many things about the importance of people who live within truth and do not accept the lies and then start perpetuating their own, dictatorships. And do you have anything that you sort of use as a mantra, or kind of something that helps really keep you focused, that you can share with our viewership, and also directing it to, because I feel like America's gone indefinitely, and that is a great tragedy. So we have to put the pressure on Europe. I don't see anywhere else that we can be applying this pressure. But is there anything that you have, a beautiful sentiment, a mantra, something that people can grab onto like a life raft in this time?
I do, but it's kind of banal. I do not normally share it, but kind of it helps me. Actually, it is a thing that you would repeat to yourself. So it's kind of a Churchill's quip. Never surrender.
Mm. Yeah, see, I don't find that banal. I actually think that sometimes part of what worked with MAGA is the simplicity of these slogans. So the never surrender is good because, I think all of us who've done this work, we know what history doesn't tell us what's going to happen, but it offers suggestions. So we know that this is dangerous. And, you either go down swinging, or you become a part of the problem. So I love this, never surrender. I think we just found the beautiful title for this episode. Yeah, it's perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. It means so much. I do hope you come back, and I look forward to following your work. Is there anything that we can do to promote any work that you have, or a newsletter that we can direct people to? We're more than
E-
happy to,
Yeah, I
push
do. I do
people in
have
that
a newsletter. I
direction.
have a blog, or how I don't know how these things are called these days. It's just my
Yes,
name.com, landsbergis.com, landsbergis.com,
beautiful.
and there's a a chance to register for a newsletter, and I'm sending it out every week.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for the work that you do, the time, and let's never surrender. What else can we
Yeah.
do?
Thank you so
you.
much. You've been
Thank you
very
so
kind.
much.
Thank you.
Perfect.